Have you ever considered 7v7?
First off, it's not
Of
doable.
what we're
Second off, it's a
talking
fucking
about, where
stupid
it's
idea
like,
because it wouldn't even solve
well,
the queue
what if
times.
queue times were only
Shut
like
up.
set of demand, and so like
Because
we weren't sure
if you
when
played
we
tank
did this,
for 3
whether, like, if queue
seasons,
times suddenly
and
went
you
down,
have
if you would
16
just get a ton
characters to
more
play.
for
to show you like where the vision's going in the next few years too. I think a lot of it is like currently we look at the game and we understand that players think there's really great content coming out. I mean, I'm so excited for Juno, obviously at the background, but it can't just be the cadence of hero release and maps and continue that for years.
So I don't even have my mic in front of me. I just turned straight on. Hey, Rilesh.
like either one of you.
Hi.
Like, what would you do?
Last, you go first.
I have my McDonald's
Okay.
Coke.
I think Alex is 100% right. It can't be just hero every 4 or 5 months and maps every other season. Especially with like how competitive the gaming space is. Everyone's fighting tension.
My lighting's screwed, so.
And even, even if like
This is now short
personally
fuse,
you
like
might
immediately
feel
now.
like if you felt Overwatch was in a good place, overall, like eventually people get bored of just the same thing over and over and over, and something new to spark their attention really.
I'm
does,
really worried
like,
that they're going to run the
life back
gambit
to it.
against Marvel rivals, and they're going to
Fortnite
outcompete
when they
them.
did like their revamp,
Have the
like,
stable
going back
product.
on, like, the original release, and yeah, they prey on nostalgia with that and that kind of stuff, but like that was a big moment for them. It did bring a lot of players back. It did
I don't know
bring
why
a
I'm
lot of
so
that excitement back. And I'm not saying like Overwatch needs to do that, although I'm sure there's tons of people that would want that. They would just something big enough to like move the needle, because even though like Overwatch has changed a lot in the past 2 years, in some ways like very much for the better, even though people
Slow
may
upgrade,
not know
slow
that, they don't know
upgrade.
communications, so they don't know about the balance, so they don't know like how often this kind of stuff happens. They don't even want to come back and give it a chance, right?
Yeah.
Got to
Like,
show more
if
of
something
my
big
skin
enough
to see if
comes,
it'll auto-adjust.
then they might try it and they like, oh wait, this actually could be good, and that could be something that's in the game, some kind of major change, or like we're going to talk about it here, 6v6, like 6v6.
Let's see if I can do anything
format change.
about
Like,
this.
something like that is big
No
enough.
contrast, that's
that
perfect,
could get
right?
people's attention, or even something out of the game where you're
Saturation,
like, people always
beautiful.
talk about having a TV show, or like whatever happened to like
Brad,
the cinematics,
how you doing?
because like early Overwatch there were so many cinematics and it would just hit, and it just doesn't really.
They
feel
can't
like
do
there's as much
cinematics
of
anymore.
that anymore.
That's a monetary
Honestly,
restriction, not anything
if I
else.
had
It
to
always
choose,
has been.
I would do both together.
Blizzard
at
has
the same time, and
a cinematics department that
fighting
works
for people's
cross
attention,
between all their games.
Live
They
free to
just
play
been
game
released.
is really, really difficult. I'm very lucky. To
These guys have to fucking campaign to get cinematics for their game, I
But
guarantee.
yeah, I think it's
They have to make a
honestly
business
combination
argument
of
for
a
it.
few things, but I mostly agree with Alec. That's just gotta be something big.
No, I don't think it has to be something big.
Like, in a different way.
I think it has to be something big and consistency. You can't just do something big if you can't,
I'll be very quick
consistent
to
around
want to
it.
get to more of you guys' answers. I think I agree with the things you guys said. I think so. Just to summarize as well, what you guys said: more open communication, like paint a clear vision and then deliver on it, and then also bring some surprises. So I think all those things are really good. I think ultimately, whatever players you bring in and out, they have to be satisfied with the game they're playing. So I think the game has to satisfy the players, and then I would think, big picture, we need to make people fall in love with Overwatch Heroes again. So I think it's a big open statement, but what drew people early was the like, oh my god, I love the Dragon Short, I love Genji, I love Hanzo, I love seeing what they're doing, I love Mercy. Obviously, it's very easy for me to sit here and say, yeah, I want that TV show, as Flat's already mentioned, I want that Netflix show. I think I've told you guys this directly as well, that I think it's a big thing. But anything, I think, that you guys can do to make players fall in love with the heroes again. We know PvE is kind of not happening in the way it was going to happen. But I think, we need to fall in love with Overwatch again, I think, is the TLDR. Anything you guys want to add before we move to our next question? Alec and Aaron.
No, I think we could probably start talking about just like the vision for Overwatch.
Yeah,
so,
that was my next question. Actually. Yes, that's perfect. Because I'll just set up the question, which is that we're about 8 years in now, right? This is about to be the 8th year of Overwatch, and I think I look to the other games that have been out for this long, like League of Legends, like Dota, Counter-Strike. It feels like they have a pretty clear definition of like this is what the game is. Like this is what you sign up for when you play. I personally, I find that changes a lot with Overwatch. It has changed a lot, as you kind of alluded to in your blog, Aaron. Like the format changed so much. We went from like 6 Winstons to now we're 5v5 and 1 tank to 2. What to you guys is the core identity of Overwatch? Like, what does it boil down to when you strip everything else away? What will it always be in a
This is like, we could talk about this one for a long time. Like, in short, I think, Overwatch, like what we want it to be is just the best team-based, competitive, hero-based arena shooter that we can make it, right? PvP arena shooter that we can make it. And I think that there's a competitive nature to our game that's integral to the enjoyment of it. And you're right, it has changed over time. Like, it was the game when it first launched, like it had no hero limit.
Oh, guys, we know the history of Overwatch. You had no fucking idea what you're doing. You improvised the entire time.
Like the original essence or the original soul of what Overwatch was, that was a little bit crazier, a lot crazier than what it is right now. And we have a design value at Blizzard, which is like the right decisions change over time, and you can kind of look back at the history of Overwatch, I think, and see where like I don't really know if it would have been the right thing to do to ship Overwatch with role queue, let's say, but like you can see why
I get that
it became
opinion.
the right decision.
I get that
became
opinion.
the right decision for the game. And so I think that we are in a place right now where the game, the player base that we have, it's a fairly competitive player base. They're pretty invested in the game.
Because everyone else is quick. Because everyone else is quick. Because you can't produce content that fast.
The direction that we go in the future is to serve like this set of players and to continually improve upon the game experience that we have right now. You talked about some of the other games that have come out, in the meantime, right? And there's games that have come out, and then there's
around a bit.
Competitive games that have been out for a long time. I think that have some things maybe that Overwatch is missing a bit. And one of those things is either like we talk about this internally a lot, either like a greater strategic depth or player agency. And when you look at it, there is a lot of strategic depth to Overwatch.
Oh yeah, no doubt they got the questions sent, but just how much prep do you think now?
Once you get into the match, it really is like executing, right? And there's not, besides like swapping to another hero, there's not like a ton of other choices to make. And like you have a lot of other games where there might be other choices to make inside of that. That was part of what the pickable passives, quick play hacks, was trying to get at. Are there other systems that we could potentially put into this game that give players more agency, or that start giving the game a little bit more strategic depth to it? Overwatch also, it is incredibly fast paced. There's a lot going on, so it's like I think we can only do a certain amount of that at any one time before people start getting overloaded. But we're starting to look at that, and so it kind of gets into like, as we talk about the future for Overwatch, we think that that we always ought to be working on at least like one big bet for this game. And there are I think some really exciting things that are happening right now.
Did you say one big bet?
So it's like, I guess like I agree with you of like what is that magic, how you introduce people to this magic of Overwatch. I think we have some ideas on some things that we could release to do that.
Big releases, consistent product.
Like I know this is kind of going long. Sorry,
you're not going to beat the other people with the constant churn.
What are the things we can do to the core game?
You just can't make things fast enough. And that's fine.
Either improving it from a competitive standpoint, or doing things like adding strategic depth or player agency to it in or out of the game. That could also be something like a map voting system. And then what are the really big bets that we can make on Overwatch as well to kind of like
I know what it is. Come on, guys. I know.
Kind of like
I know what
like expose Overwatch. Outside of our community, this like very invested hardcore community.
I know.
Community outside of that, and there's a lot of opportunities to, I think, reintroduce Overwatch, the PvP shooter, to that community.
Yeah, I think even when you look at conversations on the team within probably the last 6 months, where the focus has shifted, it's been much more. You can kind of like almost see these words on the wall, like we're a social competitive game, and that starts to lead some of the things we're talking about in more seriousness than maybe we did previously.
Social
There's a lot more serious conversations around bans, more serious conversations around tournaments, more serious conversations around map voting. I think a lot of that might have been a little like, oh, that would be nice in the past, but I think now those are things that are top of mind that we want to actually try to build towards eventually.
Except that Overwatch is fun for the average person.
And the social part of that, I think one of our goals right now as a game is to restore the social fabric within the game. I think that's been something that we recognize has been lost over time.
Yeah, because you introduced a full new fucking client. They only downgraded the social elements.
Has changed, right? Just look at how many people are in Discord now compared to when Overwatch first launched, and how people communicate through that versus like in-game chat, right? But there are things we need to do.
There's no incentive in the game to ever group up with anyone apart from one other person.
So I think those are some of the things that just come into focus a lot more, and where you'll see some of the resources go.
You'd never put any incentive ever.
It might be interesting to talk.
So you can't call it a social competitive game.
Anytime if you want to move on.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Oh, you're good. I'm loving this.
Okay.
Nah, Aaron ain't interrupting. Sorry, SVB ain't interrupting for shit.
Competitive means.
Why flats and everything? Because he's currently got
a lot of different things.
Currently got 2,500 people because he was streaming to 7,000 people on Marvel Rivals the other day.
There's probably a spectrum of competitive games out there, and it's like you put like a game, let's say like Counter-Strike or something like that. That's kind of like pegged pretty far to the end of that spectrum in how competitive it is. And like there's multiplayer games out there where I guess you compete against each other, but they're really just about the fun rather than the competition. You know, like you're gonna go play Mario Party or something like that. Like it's kind of hard to call that a competitive game, even though you're competing. And so there is like this spectrum that you kind of I think it's important to kind of like know where you exist on that and kind of like how do you place yourself. And I think we are.
It's different between a board game versus a competitive card game.
The game that we are trying to peg all the way on one side of that. Like, and if you're saying like, let's say the right side of that graph.
50-50 that anyone speaks English, yeah. And there's a 10% chance they're French and I have to turn off everything.
You know, I don't think we're in the middle or anything like that. So it's like we treat our game as a competitive experience. And we want people to have that
design the systems for the high level, design the feelings and the way the game works and average rank for the low level. That's what you do.
It's not
you can do both.
All the way over
just need to be good
on the right side.
Exactly, Sig.
Flats, do you mind if this is the second? We're going to start.
Flashback French text is the reason I turn it all off. One of these days there's going to be a French viewer that's going to stick around after the first 5 seconds of being insulted.
Like, do you mind if I just ask a quick follow-up on that?
No! SVB, shut up. Let them talk. Just guide them in the direction.
I like that you kind of define this idea of like we're a competitive social shooter. When you say competitive, what do you mean? Like, is it like people playing just comp? Is it pro play?
That's a very interesting question.
Top 500? Is it
because there's not a single squint of the path to pro or the actual competitive game mode of the game in the video game. It's all outside.
Experience of playing a game, just like the actual release of the game.
Why is the path to pro not linked to a 5v5 full team format ladder?
That game, like a competitive ecosystem around that game. And so I think a lot of times what we're talking about is just the actual game of Overwatch and not necessarily a lot of the other competition that's happening with it. And there is a range inside
Team Q could have been. Yeah,
well.
they thought of doing it. No, they didn't do Team Q.
Are in,
Team Q needs a Team SR. If it doesn't have a Team SR, people will smurf, and then it's completely null and void.
It's going to be different for every person, you know, that's playing.
Never tried Team Q.
There's a lot of people that treat quick play as their main competitive format of Overwatch, and it is actually our most popular game mode. You know, like more people play quick play than play comp. But not everybody treats it that same way. And so like we have to recognize that we're not going to be able to there's not going to be a one size fits all approach for this. And so I think that there is something really interesting about kind of having this range of competitiveness that we offer people in the game.
Yep.
But also
they're not saying very much at the moment. It's kind of a boring topic.
Kind of play it for different reasons. So for us, like ranked, and like as you start getting into high levels of ranked, we treat that as an experience that we really need to protect the competitive integrity of it, and we put a lot of our efforts around balance even and hero design into like making sure that side of the game stays as competitive as
no fucking shit. If you didn't do that, your game would die immediately. They're not saying anything right now.
We want people to be able to have serious games of Overwatch. It's just not going to be quite as serious as it is when you get into comp.
Sure. Alec, anything you want to add for Flats follow-up? Okay, awesome. Flats, go ahead. Anything you want to add to what was discussed?
Not really a ton. Just I personally think that quick play should be like way less.
And remember, these guys aren't streamers or orators in general.
But
Aaron probably does pre-made speeches.
Mostly former competitive player at this point.
At the top of the company, nothing else.
I've always viewed as quick play as like the more.
Aaron's
fun,
probably only used to
have a good time
PowerPoint
with friends,
presentations.
like play with like off rolls type of game mode. But it does feel like as Overwatch 2 has gone on, it's almost like ranked light. And I don't know if that totally is the vibe that should be going for it, because sometimes you just want to load up and like play your off roll or play something else, and it's like sometimes you feel like you kind of have to just lock in, right? Because like the game is so much harder, and maybe I just
don't really care.
Misremembering like
it's generically bad that quick play to be so sweaty.
Didn't totally feel as.
It's because the game's in a more solved state now.
Maybe saying it.
Exactly what you're saying, but the game's in a more solved state, so of course it's more sweaty. There's no other way to do it.
Always be competitive, and like you said before,
the more solved the game gets, the more it filters down to the low level, and therefore the more sweaty it gets. That's just how. Like the only reason quick play is casual is because they're the quarantine of competitive players in the comp ladder.
As long as I finish my 50 wins, I can easily hold it, and I don't even think I deserve it at the moment. Like it's really not that difficult. And so there's probably some things maybe
Mario Kart random box to quick play. Yeah, they should add
we used to talk about
Pokeballs
like a third queue
to quick play. Can we just run
ranked quick play?
Can we run to free stock but just with Pokeballs? Yeah. Final destination free stock with Pokeballs.
Yeah. So like we used to have a lot of discussions around it, and maybe it's time to talk about those some more. Like some of the downsides to it is like the more queues we introduce, like the more it kind of splits up the player base. And then players also, they self-select into the one that they think that they ought to be playing.
You haven't missed much yet.
In any one of those, you're still going to get, because there's people in comp that treat it just as,
they talked
like,
about wanting to make the game competitive first and foremost.
Of a game where they're just doing
still a lot of correct things that aren't interesting.
And so like you would still have people in every one of those treating it just as serious as they do. And so like when we used to talk about it, we never really acted on it because we thought it might just play out the same as what we've got right now with people asking for a fourth queue.
If you want quick play to be non-sweaty, what you should do is introduce RNG elements into it.
That makes sense.
And then remove the RNG elements for comp. That's what all games have done.
You want to add before we move
for the most part, that are successful in making a non-sweaty comp. Because all the people that want something competitive won't play the thing with RNG elements.
How much should comp and quick play differ? I mean, I think when we talk about like,
am I crazy there?
You know, sometimes a lot of us are like, these should be comp only. Like, make sure these like more like crunchy systems are actually like only in comp. That's the experience.
I like gambling,
like
yes.
The lighter version of Overwatch and quick play. I personally think quick.
Yeah, no, exactly, Redish. Exactly what you're saying.
Try to figure out ways to alleviate that over time, whether it be like even in some of the experiments we're doing in the future with how we want to look at like roll queue and everything, or some other form of it. But it has gotten to the point where you
question of plan. Cool. Yeah, no, I thought they would.
Counter swapping you. You're like, oh, this is not the quick play experience you remember, or really maybe even you're looking for at that point in time.
No, but you're actually being smart though, Placid. Random fucking crits from TF2.
Like,
that's RNG.
Have you found, because you've added a lot of
gets turned off in competitive, so the competitive people don't play the quick play variation.
Penalties that are really harsh, and like the battle pass progress is like
they've released a dev block. This is redundant. It's only redundant if they only want to talk about the things they are.
Because I need to get certain things for my battle pass.
Why are you on this podcast? Because SVB wants to continuously be a part of communication with the devs. It's a full-time job for him. If you can keep doing it.
It is like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were too stringent at the beginning.
I'm way too
a little bit on some of those penalties.
Way too controversial for this.
But definitely was.
And also, I'm not very popular.
This first one out. I think that's something we're still evaluating. You know, I think we were just talking to Gavin and Morgan yesterday about what some next steps could be for that, and if they're in the right place currently.
Random risk moment, genuinely.
I do think though there's an element in quick play that you're still playing to win in some way. I think there's a level of like how hard you're trying to win, but I think as someone,
they don't understand how to make a casual game mode. It's about RNG elements, 100%.
That's the right way. That's not how you want quick play to evolve either, right?
Yep.
We do want to be a place where people are still playing, it's like you're playing pickup soccer with your friends. You're all trying to like have a good time, try to win. You may not like.
I'll put myself in the middle to be respectful to SCB,
but you're still trying to
who I'm currently insulting.
Set up plays and score goals, right? I think that's the same sort of thing we want. We still want the game of Overwatch to unfold.
Randomly ban half the heroes every game? No, but you can do stuff like that. That's the thing. I mean, that's a bad idea of how to do it, but sure.
So I think when
that's what we're talking about, RNG.
The more casual mode, they're right.
It's functionally the same.
Like, you are playing
so it doesn't effectively quarantine.
Like one of the things that we
people that don't want a competitive experience, and so it gets sweaty.
Stomps in the game, and there can be a lot of different reasons for stomps, but they don't feel good when they happen to you.
All right, are we just all saying things that are factually true but not interesting?
Like, do we want to, like, how much freedom do you give somebody to another player's experience in the game?
This would be interesting.
Like a perfect answer here. It's probably going to be something that like us and every other like social, especially like competitive game is always going to struggle with, but we are trying to find like that right balance of like how do you give players freedom, but also how do you like try to restrict them from like harming another player's game experience.
Counter swapping, yeah. So
and there has been differences there when looking at stomps. Like the spawn system that we have in quick play is different than the one in competitive. And we're actually looking at that for Season 12. And
can someone tell Alec that he can just download this thing here called NVIDIA Broadcast, and it'll just cut him out properly? Can someone just tell him that?
Nice, thank you. That's very lucrative.
I know he's on green screen, but the green screen's really not working very well.
Not on this part now.
Okay, cool. I want to actually skip forward a significant chunk, actually, if you're all right with it. I actually want to go into talking about tanks and stuff, because I think these guys have alluded to counter swapping. So do you mind if I...
go right ahead.
Right. So
yeah, but this just takes over your source. So
saliently there that like you're playing quick play and people are still like 5-man counter swapping you, and it's very frustrating. So I think that's partly where the 6v6 movement has come from, right? Like people have said like, look,
yeah, but like 80% of people have an NVIDIA GPU,
and it kind of feels like, and certainly the argument on the 6v6 side is that counter swapping is built into the one tank format. Like you have one tank, there will always be counter swapping, and that always will create misery. So is that how you guys view it? Like, do you think that counter swapping will always be a thing in Overwatch 2? Or do you find like there's maybe some way we can alleviate it? And do you agree with the assessment that like people are like, this sucks? Like this, as a format, this sucks. People swapping me all the time.
Yeah, I think there's a few things here, right? First off, what we see like actually how players behave is and tank players swap about the same rate, right? They usually swap. You see on average like 1 a match, and then support players are about half of that, so they swap a lot less. And I think the experience of tank, you're kind of the one being targeted in this, right? It's not just that the tank's swapping for you; it's also that the DPS swaps for you too. And I think everyone's talked about what are in some ranks where it might feel like Reaper, they get a Reaper swap into them, and they're like, oh man, I have to deal with Reaper. That part can definitely be frustrating. I think there's ways we want to look at alleviating that. I think we want to look at some of those like more hard counters still, make those a little bit softer. That's something that's on our mind. But also I think it's important for us to kind of have a conversation about that is a core part of the game, the core mechanic of Overwatch, and they're actually not necessarily like
probably my stream running in the background at the same time.
Team composition and how those go against each other. That's a game knowledge.
At least we can still listen to it, right?
As you move up, right? And we believe like that flexibility is really important in the game. We would never want to lock people into hero roles, into a hero choice for the whole game. I just don't think that's what Overwatch is, or what Overwatch is necessarily about. But we've tried some things internally. We looked at like limited swaps. We looked at maybe you have to earn your swaps. We've definitely gone through some experience.
What, are you stupid?
Chatting about
Why are you doing that?
Up the list of things that are at top of mind for the team, and like maybe some
run out your swaps, and you just end up stuck on a hero that's being countered.
Understand it is a frustrating experience.
Because all you do is you create the 1-2-3-4 meta instead of the 1-2 meta.
What are the extreme examples? And for us, when we talk about the hard
limiting swap seems ass
versus soft counters, we need to kind of identify some of those that feel really bad because it's map dependent, it's hero dependent, right?
The amount of traffic where you're driving.
Swap into Zarya and your Diva, and you suddenly can't block the beam doesn't mean necessarily like a finished match. It's really depending on like how much verticality is available to you.
No, but Alec, it does mean that you hate your life and you wish you weren't playing this video game. Can we
need to provide tanks with
there, right? If you're at mid rank and they swap Zarya to your Diva, you just fucking hate yourself.
Fair enough.
Is that good enough?
We're here to listen to you talk, so go ahead.
I think it's interesting too when you look at like the broad or even like the broader Overwatch community where like there's different parts of the
like that was stopping took 7 eesh.
Counter swapping tank play in 6v6.
Just play several ranks higher so you can outskill them. Yeah, just be better at the video game.
Some of this is actually even regions.
Well, if you're good enough, you could carry anyway. All right,
like,
yeah, sure.
It is something that we hear about a lot, especially like on like North American creators and stuff. But like some of like the other regions, they have kind of a different take on it. And we get feedback sometimes, like let's say we're talking like to our Korean players where they might be like
the Koreans, like, yes, the Koreans really like
I think what we want to
5v5.
like one of the things we would like players to know is
it's like how the Japanese can all climb walls, the Koreans like 5v5.
What is saying is we
their D&D character sheet.
There's some things we can do to address it in the world of 5v5. But we're also trying to listen to like all of our players like worldwide at the same time.
Yeah, and it's something because we, as I said, it's more top of mind. So we're taking a closer look at it recently, and what we see is
Koreans ruined Overwatch is what Christopher told me.
Matches actually happens the most like in Plat and Diamond.
American character trait being a cowboy, yeah, cowboys and guns.
Higher ranks are consolidating on the meta faster, or whether they're more one tricks in that area, and then bronze players just don't do it as much too. It's kind of like has this little parabola there.
Right, there's lots of really interesting things. Flats, anything you wanna?
I do kind of want to lead into one of my questions, then, if that's okay. Because I feel like it's kind of
one of your pre-approved questions. Flats.
We probably want to talk about a lot of 6v6 stuff in a little bit, but let's say we run the test for the 6v6 stuff. Doesn't do well, right? We decide not to go back to 6v6. I want to know, how does the team feel about the game current day, like right now where it is? Because personally, I feel like Overwatch is a great casual game. Like if you just play a couple hours, either a week or...
I think Overwatch right now is worse than the old Overwatch for being casual.
But if once you start playing for a number of hours, you really start to see the flaws. And one of the big ones is with counter swapping. I personally agree and also disagree with the statement of like...
No, I think it's pretty plain to see the counter swapping immediately when it happens to anyone.
The amount of value you get for just swapping a singular person, like the tank player, because they have so much value compact into them. And I feel like that's a lot of the argument around the 66 is like... once you put it on 2 people, it's a lot harder to, focus on one person.
No, it's that you cannot design them not to be counter swapped. You can just mitigate it.
You get so much value from it.
It's the fact that they can actually
I just kind of want to know, like, what is the team?
There's a load of arguments there, just not.
This also kind of almost comes back to the first question of the interview, is we don't decide to do it. How do you believe?
Flats is saying, guys, if you don't go back to 6v6, how else are you gonna bring excitement? Love this guy. This guy's really smart. This is a good line of questioning.
Yeah, I can go ahead. I can start on that. And I think you're right that regardless of whether we would move forward or like permanently swap to a 6v6 format, just running it would be something that would be pretty exciting for the community. You know, like we totally we totally get that. But like I think it's also like there's like a few things maybe to talk about in the
hydration. I ran upstairs, with, like, I turned on stream, and now I'm here.
Up there, like
okay.
There's like probably a pretty
I do not have hydration
set of like definitions of what a casual is, you know. And so like, you know, I mentioned like Mario Party very early on, like that's
there isn't that broad a set of definitions. Casual is somebody that plays occasionally.
Category as a game like that.
Thanks for the sanity check.
I'd probably push back on that a little bit. Like the
I'd say a 4 at the moment.
Of maybe like any one hero in our game is pretty long, and like the mastery curve of like
I just struggling to find my place on the page.
Content is getting better and better, actually. I think even if we look at like Juno's coming in season 12, I think our hero releases have gotten more defined in terms of what Overwatch 2 heroes are compared to what it may have been in the past. So very excited about that. I think there's Life Weaver changes I'm excited about coming to the next patch. Things of that nature that we're looking at kits and being able to actually make them better. So I think there's constant improvement happening. You know, map reworks coming in season 13, right? So that we've spoken about as well.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
So I think evaluating all of that, I think there's really still a very strong
April 2023.
We need to make developments in the game more rewarding. You know, make sure that there's times you come back.
It's been a cool 16 months since he was released.
There's something going on that's very special, and I think there's a few of those.
Yeah, it's been 16 months since Life Weaver was released.
But also making sure like there's
glacially slow.
I think right now there's a very core experience. But we need to make sure we put a little
fix the VFX and the player change. Yeah, I'm sure they're that avid Ralph viewers.
Less competitive than that core experience, right?
It's a bit of a shame on this stream at the moment because they'd be watching me watching this stream. If not,
we're working with a really good base here. Overwatch is still, I think, an amazing game.
Yeah,
but
you get 5 legs up. All you have to do is not fuck it. That's all you have to do, and that's as a base level. That's pretty good to work with.
What you said.
Yeah.
You said like the content is like is improved. I'm curious on like what aspect you mean.
Yeah, because in my mind it's all fine.
we had a podcast recently. We talked about it, and like even at the beginning of this, we talked a little bit about like
it hasn't
be something.
It hasn't improved since Overwatch 1 for the most part.
What things
cadence improved slightly.
Are you guys most proud of?
And then we're going through like
what do you think are
Life Weaver Malga.
Well,
rework. They're just all fucked.
Even if you look at some.
And they continue to be fucked.
To me, is kind of
I say good half of their work since launch still has to be redone and hasn't.
Like if you look at Runasapi coming out, where it's like that's
Runasapi was fine.
Push and the first few maps of Push, and then I think it's the best designed map for Push, right? And that's because we learned things from when we released the mode. And I think you look at Heroes, you look at Juno, and we look at sort of some of the polish that's gone into there. There's a lot of people on the team, including myself, that haven't been around for a very long time. Right, and I think all of these people have gotten better and better.
Yeah, I unleashed the clasp on the chain around their leg to let them go on this podcast
together on the day-to-day and being more focused and getting better at our jobs. I think that's helped a lot with some of the content we've released.
I think that there's a bit more there too. So like the say what you want to say about the competitive system that launched with Overwatch 2.
Yes, it was a direct downgrade.
Awful. Was like a really big step forward.
Step back to what you no, Aaron. Step back to what you did before, an exact revert of what you did. All of the work that you did in the first 9 seasons, you reverted all of that, and it got better. Yes.
That we're getting into now, so something.
Can we just get our head pats for doing what we already did, and not fucking the game actively?
Things like the April Fools events that we run, we feel like there's really something about kind of like changing the way that our heroes play on a core fundamental level that our players like that really resonates.
How's Life Weaver Malga going, guys?
Player base. And so I think that like
Juno's good. We fixed everything, guys.
Coming forward, whether it's
I like Iliar and Jungle Queen. Everyone likes Jungle Queen. I like Iliar.
We start looking.
Iliar is questionable though.
The response that we've gotten from players to events like that, like Alex said, I think that there's like a lot of learnings that we've had, and it's taken us a little while to get to this point.
3 reworks and 5 heroes, and arguably like 3 of the heroes are fine.
Like
6 heroes
really wants to play these types of events.
It's like a 30% success rate, but sure.
Playing the most hours for the longest period of time, and so we think that and you'll see it in upcoming events that we're going to be doing, in upcoming seasons through the rest of this year and next year. I think you're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, I think like April Fools is one of these moments. April Fools,
The googly eye time of the year.
Right? Well, that's last year's one, where like we're like, oh, this is really resonating, and that was sort of where we started to sort of shift a little bit about, and now we're at this place of like, okay, these are the types of events we want.
I feel like they've been really struggling to take the easy
It's
wins.
better with the community as well.
Yeah, and
in
it's
terms
not
of these PvP things.
Yeah, 2 or 3 days. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just events. It's like,
Yeah.
how do we start pulling this stuff into the game?
Yeah, kind of everywhere, but that's like a
Big things to pull in groups of people. Consistent format to keep them there.
I'm thinking we do because we've got about 15 minutes of their time left. I have
What?
one follow-up question on
Wait,
this
is that
second-
it?
No, I think we have longer.
We're supposed to have an hour, right?
Hour and a
They
half.
just got
Hour
here.
and a half? Oh,
Yeah.
we have more? Okay, well that's great. If you have more of your time, then we don't have to.
Hour and a half? I expected 3 hours.
I have a follow-up on this department, Flats, and then we can maybe start moving over towards like 6v6 kind of stuff, because I know that the 6v6 people will be very unhappy with us if we have this time with you guys and we don't kind of interrogate a little bit. But since while you are talking about like all this big picture stuff, I'm just
Interrogate
kinda
it.
curious.
Ask our pre-approved questions.
You mentioned, Alec, you were like, okay, map vetoes are on the line, hero bans are on the line. Like, how big? And even Aaron mentioned as well that you're looking at like just big changes, like something that might even change up the format, the open queue. How big are we talking? Like, how big is the window of where you could go? Like, what can we see? Are we gonna see like items? You know, like a MOBA item system?
Get
Are we gonna
fucked.
see like some sort of talent system? You know, that's what the pickable passes alludes to. Like,
No, it
how
would
big is the
completely
table when it
ruin
comes to you
all
guys talking
readability of
about
the game for a new
how serious are
player.
those discussions?
Ruin it.
Like, yeah, we could actually go
Demolish
down
it.
this
It would
route of
create such a
adding
high
items
barrier
to
to entry that there's no
Overwatch,
point even trying.
Yeah, I mean,
Awful.
we have conversations about these things. We have been testing some of these things, but I
We
think
should have
what,
had that
leads the
conversation
is
5 years ago and
it
discarded
has
it
to
as an option.
improve the core experience of Overwatch. Long-term.
Significantly
It
in
can't
order
just
to...
be a short-term like, oh, this is nice, and then you're like a month later, like, actually, this needs to be removed, from the game entirely. And that's why sometimes you see some of those things.
Was a tragedy.
SCP, this is
Hydrogen device
ridiculous.
like
What
that
is wrong with you as a
never
person?
stood a
You might
chance.
be a bad person. It's just the money you get for the month. Jesus Christ.
In like pickable passives, we're not necessarily trying that exact system.
Hope it
We're,
doesn't add.
experimenting with DUI of this. We're experimenting with being able to make a choice in the game and how players actually feel about that. Do they change strategy? But it's not necessarily on the individual ones. Like, we've talked about here specific ones and what that may be and how that would look and whether that is good for long-term health. And that's something we've tested recently. So there's a bunch of different things we're trying out, I would say. But at the end of the day, they have to make the core Overwatch experience better. And there's a lot of things
FVP
about that
short on
experience that
red.
people
No, genuinely,
love
this
because
is
of how approachable it is and how clean
aggressive.
it is. So if we did something
See you, Brad.
like items, it would have to make the game better for hundreds of hours, right?
It's a terrible
I have
idea
a
to
hard
items.
time,
Absolutely terrible.
like answering the question without getting into too many specifics, because I don't really want to like give away everything that we're doing. But I think that like maybe
Yeah, sure.
from like the high level big picture perspective is it's like I think that's like a fair ask from the community, and it's something that we agree with, the way that you frame this question of like what are some of the bigger things that you can be doing to the game besides just adding additional content
How
to
could
it.
you
So,
possibly improve this game apart from to change the format back to 66?
it's like it's too early to talk about some of those. You'll start seeing some things coming later this year that'll probably like kind of like give people hints and point to different systems that can be coming.
He's smiling. I'm scared.
But like big
SUV,
picture,
stop
is like,
smiling.
yeah,
It's
like,
not going to be
think-
okay. I
think
promise
we're like
you.
mostly on the same page here, with a like a valid.
Remove the echo. If I can't get it, I'll
maybe
go
not
to you.
critique,
Thank
but
you,
a
Dada.
valid direction for where to take Overwatch.
You have like a little crumb you want to drop us, Aaron? Like a little like, oh, I really, like this concept. Like it really kind of piques my interest.
No,
Very approved
because I'll
question.
just end up.
No.
What I'll do is I'll probably do the whole thing and I'll get in trouble. So
He heard me
we don't-
first, and he probably thought I said too much.
4v4 damage
We
heroes
don't want to
only.
get anyone in trouble here. Okay.
my
Flats,
very
you're
first
Merging the
interview
tank and
on
support role
the
into one hero.
Overwatch team, we brought some creators in, and the one thing we weren't going to talk to them about, this is way before the game shipped, was that we were going to have cosmetics in the game. And like, why is that a thing you're not supposed to talk about? But whatever. And I was answering a question, and I just
Bizarre thing to
I
limit.
don't know why I got to that point, and I just started. I'm just like people could see me start to say skins, and I said it, and it took me like 10 seconds to say the word. And I'm like this runaway train of like you're not supposed to say this, and I just did it anyway. So
Couldn't help it.
yeah,
You get excited. I get it.
It must be hard. Like, it must be so hard having so many, like, a million things, and also keeping track of, like, what you've made public and what you've not made public. I sympathize.
It's, like, hard to even play the game sometimes. Like, I remember before, like, Overwatch 2 shipped and you're, like, playing Reinhardt, trying to stop your charge, because all you're doing at work during the day is playing with Reinhardt that gets to cancel his charge.
A
And it's just,
universally
like,
terrible
you just, like,
change.
can't keep it in
A
your
really
head of,
bad
like,
change.
what's live, what's coming this season, what's coming the next season, and it's, like, it's pretty awkward.
I can imagine. Flash, you have any follow-ups on this section, or should we move on?
I feel like we should move on. I think you should do the first question on 6v6. I think that's a good one, right? Up to you.
Sure.
Is
Okay.
it?
Yeah.
Probably
absolutely, I'm
terrible.
down to, and then I know Flats has quite a few follow-ups on the 6v6, which I'm eager for you guys to answer Flats' questions. So
The two
I'll
fence
start us
sisters
off on the 6v6
extraordinaire.
section, which is just that. Do you guys basically
Ah!
get why people are seeking a 6v6 solution? Why they feel like we'll never solve
What
the
is up with
tank
Twitch?
solution, why we need the 2 tank synergy, why it balances
Do you
the game
get
out,
why?
why it kind of gives this higher skill ceiling? Like, do you get where they come from?
Yeah, it's a different experience to some degree, right? I think Aaron mentioned it. The pressure of that experience, the responsibility of that experience, is way heightened in Overwatch 2 compared to Overwatch 1, and that's something that's
feels
a lot of team
terrible
players
aside
may
from
not enjoy. I feel like, especially if you're playing off tank and then you come to Overwatch 2, that's a different experience kind of in itself too.
It's not a different
Playing your
experience. It's
hero that
not an
used to be able to,
experience.
take a lot more
Exclusively
flanks and
not an
routes,
experience
and
at
now
all.
your team's yelling at you maybe in chat, right? So
Future
and
characters
if you look at the way we've
fundamentally not
designed
made
tanks,
for this game mode.
We've tried to give some of them a little bit ways to let their team feel their presence more.
Piss
too,
off,
right?
3.5 second DM
take
is
the
not a
recent
change that
Wrecking-
is
Wrecking
reasonable.
Ball change, Adaptive
What are
Shields.
you
It's supposed to
cooking?
be like a little thing Wrecking Ball can use from time to time that his team can appreciate Wrecking Ball's presence, right? And he's able to actually maybe help them from time to time too. It's not
You're trying to
necessarily
play with the
main way
mental-
Wrecking Ball
the,
is playing, but something there.
Trying to play with the
So I think
feeling of the
having
team
a tank
instead of
on the
actually
team,
making the gameplay good.
leading the charge. A lot of players are kind of looking for that, and if you're playing a different role than that, then it kind of creates a lot of friction. And you get targeted more too. So we understand that solo tank has a lot more responsibility, a lot more pressure, and we've played variants of
Spider changes,
66
yeah.
where that does feel less, right?
We need to
That
work with
you
the
have-
psychology of
You
the
have
game.
someone that can cover for you.
Why
They
don't
can
you
also
make a good game?
cover for some of your allies to peel more too, because I think right now at the moment there are a lot of times where if your team's not coordinated or you're not on comms and maybe they're players that you're not familiar with, it feels like they're asking you to do one thing, but someone's asking you to do something else, and you can't be in 2 places at once all the time.
No,
right?
that it's
So,
not about people
but
asking.
previously
It's the
you-
fact that
you
you
had
can't
someone
be in
that
two
covered
places
for
at
you.
once, so
I
you
think we
can't
get
peel
that
for the backline at the
fundamentally.
same time as aggressing. It's
I do
fundamentally
wanna
an
push really quick
intractable
back
problem
a
with the
little
game
bit.
mode.
I think it's genuinely hit the point where it's unhealthy. Where
Which
the
part in
average-
particular?
about how much responsibility is on that role and how much pressure there is on that role that not
Get
even
him!
high level, not even just high level players,
Flats.
average player legitimately cannot handle how much pressure is put on it between, in your metal ranks, everybody wants a shield or wants someone to stand there. They want peel. They want people to be aggressive. They want you to get kills. They want you to have more damage than the other tank. They want you to have more pressure than the other tank. They want you to be counter swapping. You're not counter swapping their tank you're throwing. If they counter swap you, you need to either counter swap them back or have your team counter swap them, but they might not want to. It has gotten to the point where it's like not even just balance wise, because like I think a lot of people, myself included, overreacted to the balance patch that came out and thought it was pushing the tank balance way too far.
It is.
Power
You're just
But it
not.
feels
You're not great at.
decent. Like it feels good. But
No,
it's
it
like,
hasn't
it's
been
so
long
far
enough.
over to the side, and it's like I have a feeling we're gonna have to pull
It's
it
a
back.
chilling effect on the entire video
Even
game.
pushing it that far out,
Awful.
it still feels like you're sometimes 1v5 or you're
Yeah, it feels better as
1v9
tank
because
because
you're fighting your
50% is more
Um,
better as a
Not
character.
even
Like
saying 6v6 is like the answer.
doesn't mean the game's
but
better.
like that pressure is so immense that I don't even know if it's sustainable.
If
Yeah, there's a lot of social friction. And that's something we talk about a lot. Are there ways we could just better educate the player base as a whole, where they have
No,
a
you don't
role
know enough
too
about the game.
in the way the team is composed, right? Like your support players can also switch and they can also do these things. They can also play different positions. But you're correct, Flat.
That's not going to help
I
the
do
problem
think
in any
they
way.
expect your teammates expect the tank to do kind of everything a lot of the time.
Oh, it's a pre-approved question.
Actually,
That was his
follow up on
response.
as
That's a
well,
pre-approved question. Shit.
On
I know
that
they're
note,
all
as Flats
pre-approved,
mentioned, when
but
the patch came out, I saw a lot of the community kind of react strongly to be like, oh my god, they've giga buff tanks, like this is going to be awful. I think another consequence of what's happened, I see this shift a lot more in Overwatch 2 than I did in Overwatch 1, it feels like each of the roles are in opposition with each other. Like, it feels like when, you know, at the start of Overwatch 2, we had like, oh, supports don't have enough, and we needed to fix supports. Then for a while, it was like, we need to get...
You did,
DPS
because you
more stuff, and then
fundamentally
it was like,
changed
we
the
need to
type of
pass
game
it.
it was,
Now we're back
and
to
the
like,
people
well,
that
okay,
were
so
playing didn't want to play the
is it
fucking
always gonna be
game.
this way? Are we always going to have like the roles kind of at war with each other? Like, someone is losing, you know, it's like a zero-sum game. Like, someone is losing...
It was
someone
never,
else.
they were never at war with
Like,
each
does it
other
always have
in
to be this way, or do
66.
you guys feel like
Never.
you have ideas for how to solve
Apart from
that-
people complaining about
that
supports
constant
being
friction
stupid
between the
broken.
roles?
I think it's a matter of how far apart that is at any given time.
Pick Mercy
you
and
know?
Life Hero and tell Tank to game in
Depending on
space.
if it's closer together, I think at the moment you look at it, tanks definitely. Well, tanks have always had the most influence on a match throughout Overwatch 2's history. Whether that experience felt good or not is you know, subjective opinion, right? But they've always had the most influence on how a match results.
And if you have
at the
a
moment,
role
they
that has
definitely
loads of
have
influence
a
that
lot of
feels
the
terrible,
power
you
as
fucked up
well,
massively.
in that dynamic. So I think, are they pushed a little far? Maybe, yes. And that was, you know, somewhat intentional, trying to find, you know, where would it kind of shake the core of the game a little bit too far. But we wanted to make sure that tanks were more resilient. I think what we saw in season
Every
9,
bit of resilience you give them
dies
gets
more
used in
with
order to
season
kill
1,
more
right?
enemies.
For the
That's
amount of
all that
damage.
happens
But
at high
tanks
ranks. You're
have
just
the biggest
you're misbalancing the
drop in
gameplay
what we
loop,
call
not even the
there
the
compared to any
characters.
other role. You know,
The
let's
entire
say,
gameplay
almost
was
double
warped by
some of
the
other roles in
massive
terms of, like,
tanks.
how much damage they were taking for how much they were dying. So we wanted to kind of even that out a little bit, make them more resilient, make them feel like they could actually make plays with, you know, be able to step forward without, you know,
They can.
blowing up.
They still can't.
So
It's still
right now, I
bad
mean,
to
we're
do
still
that.
evaluating it, but I think it's just a
The
matter
only
of
time
how
it's
far
good to
apart
do
those
that is
roles
where
are.
you
I
just
think one
win
role
by
might be a
walking
little
into
bit
the enemy
better than
backline,
another
and
role
that's
at
a
any given
bad
time, or
experience for the
that's where
enemy
the
backline.
conversation may go. But if they're too far apart, that's when I think when we should probably, you know, take a look at bringing them back in a little bit.
Brain dead. Brain dead.
Sure thing.
Making tanks more lethal is awful for the video game.
We could take it over to you on some 66 questions.
Sure. I'm going to combine 2 questions into one to hopefully save some time. In the blog, it seemed like there
He was reading that
armor
off the script.
constraints with Overwatch 2 being a bigger game and a heavier game overall. Could the game even switch to handle 6v6? And if it did switch, is there a rough estimate on how long it would even take to, like, how much work would it take?
Oh
to
yeah, we
switch
make
the
it
game
Tsune
from
and
5v5 to
Cage
6v6
and
if
Life
the
with a
devs
Tree,
decided
and they're
that
all really badly
this was a
optimized, so we'd
better
have to go
format
back
for
and
the
remake them.
Yeah, that's there's maybe like a little bit of context. For
The
that,
lighting
'cause
on
I think
Dorado
the
at
answer is gonna be
nighttime
it
is hard
depends, you
because
know?
it's demanding on
maybe
Switch
not on the
players.
amount of work, but maybe on the amount of time it could take to do something like that. So yeah, there are some performance issues on some older systems with it that we would need to take care of. It's interesting, like when you
You give the
when you look
devs a
at
little bit of extra
different,
leeway, they will cut a
games
corner
and
to
game
save time
engines
every
and
time.
what they're kind of,
Or they'll use
what
it to
they're,
do
like,
something
sort of
cool.
like built for.
Cool.
Is that like you typically are going to build your engine based off of the game you're running.
We
So,
actually
like,
don't have a low
the
poly
Overwatch
version
2
of
engine is
Life
very
with a Tree yet,
optimized
so we'd have to
for
make
5v5
that in order to
game
downgrade
format,
it for
you know?
lower resolutions. What is up with these streams? Jesus Christ! At least the adverts staggered.
We've put all of our optimizations into running like the main part of the game. It's kind of similar to where it's like, I don't know exactly what engine, like let's say like Street Fighter uses, but you probably can't just suddenly start running a battle royale, you know, in the Street Fighter engine. It's just not built for that, right?
Shut up.
So ours kind of has some
shut up.
constraints there, and I think that like
Playing a game, you
there'd
just
be
took a
work
character
that
out
we
and
would
you
need to
used that
do,
extra space
and
in
the
order to do
timeline would
things.
probably depend on kind of like the results from some of these tests that we were to
Just
run.
sub,
So,
I'm already giving
like,
it
let's
enough
say
money
we
by
were
loading that advert.
to run some 6v6 tests, and the community wasn't really that excited for it,
Hey,
or
guys.
it was a very split thing.
How can they run the 6v6 test
would
but not run 6v6? What's happening?
Probably continue to put work
Let's
into it, but maybe not at the same pace as the version where it's like, hey, we put out a 6v6 test, like everybody's just flocking to that. Like you see like the popularity of it to where it's like, okay, we're gonna have to start dropping other initiatives across the team in order to like actually give
Optimize your
like,
shit.
or actually turn the game into the thing that we
Optimize
think
your
is the
shit.
best version of it and what players
Make a lower
are
poly
like,
version of Life with a Tree.
unanimously asking for.
Make
right?
it so
I
that
think
the
in
cage
world,
doesn't overload the
there
servers.
is sort of like an all hands on deck moment where you're like, oh man, we've really got to do this, you know? Like, I think that right now.
Yeah,
we
you can't
are,
run a
like,
battle royale in Street Fighters, you can't run 6v6 in Overwatch. Yeah,
is that a
absolutely.
real word?
Inane.
We are in a period where we are investigating.
Waves
like,
comes in,
kind
waves
of
goes
like
out, you can't
the
explain
total
that.
Sum of what that work would be.
What the actual fuck?
But so like there's a range, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I guess I'll have to say that I'm saying a lot of words, and the lot of words mean probably it's going to require quite a bit of work, but I'm still saying words, so I mean.
The tests we want to run.
Yeah, and we look at sort of the gameplay side of it. I think it's, there's definitely a lot of effort.
It's not optimized because you didn't optimize things. That's fine.
The 5v5 and making that shift.
Just say we've used that on more interesting abilities and stuff like that, and we need to optimize them. But it require a bit of work.
We look at sort of what tanks are able to do right now, and we're not adding a ton of new abilities. I think if anything, it's looking at what don't some of these heroes need. And we'd be taking a visual pass in terms of clutter, and can we kind of redistribute some of that as well? Because we know once you add 2 more players, it's going to get more and more crowded.
Have you guys seen how good, how big Kitsune is?
The effort there is, this giant thing that would take us a very, very long time. We want to be able to make sure if it was the best choice, we'd be able to be relatively responsive there.
I think it was on.
Yeah. Flash, you want to keep going?
Yeah. I mean, it does sound like, obviously it depends on community reaction, and I highly doubt that everyone will be united on one side. As much as everyone likes to think they will be, I'm sure there's a large silent majority.
Yeah, they'll be on the bad side or on the goodies side.
Casual side. I think of casual gamers as the TikTok gamers. That's how I think of them. They don't really like watch YouTube. They don't watch streamers. They don't do anything. They just like get a random TikTok at the beginning of the season that tells them all the changes, and they go, "Oh, what's all the skins?" And that's it. And that's like their Overwatch interaction. But it sounds like it would be a pretty long time.
Where is it?
But I guess at that point, like,
I was going to bring up the clip of Kitsune with full graphic settings.
Sounding like
Absolutely
potentially
insane.
years or a year or more, if it was even like a hell yeah, like let's go in. Would that even be counting heroes that potentially need reworks? Because I couldn't see like Malga working, or even heroes that I think are great,
my
like
god,
Junker
Flats,
Queen, like,
literally turn on the fucking
some
mode.
tuning or some changes, maybe even.
Just take. Oh my god!
Would that be included
Turn
in
on the mode. Somebody
has
done this for you, Flats. Just try it, you idiot. You play this game for a living. Try the fucking code. It's not hard.
Needed on top of it.
Those are like different parts of the team, and things like that can all kind of like work concurrently if we want them to. Like anything that you do on a game team, it's not, you don't have infinite resources.
It'll be really hard,
you have like a certain size of the team.
Strip back shouts.
The more hero design resources you potentially put into reworks could theoretically slow down other hero rework or other hero work that's happening. That's not going to be the big lift here.
How could we possibly get
really
Junker Queen to work in 6v6?
Performance considerations.
What,
I think
port it directly over and change a number?
More substantial work than the other sides of it. And they're like, and Alec can talk to this better than I can, but there are a lot of things to look at. Like one of the things that we talked about the other day is just like, hey, in the world of 6v6, suddenly does Winston lose his alternate fire? It's like,
yes,
probably not. It's just like it. Man, it'd be really hard.
It was a bad addition.
It's a lot of fun to use
to the game.
But
does Ryan lose charge cancel? Yes. Does Zarya lose 2 bubbles on himself? Yes.
Mostly in the tank
they were
world,
bad additions to the game to start with.
In that world.
In that world that we're kind of theoretically talking about right now is also accepting queue times, right?
No.
Rather than having a plan
Don't say that.
for how to actually go about trying to make those better too. I think some of the experiments we're going to run are targeted at maybe making those things better, making queue times better. But if we end up
we're re-implementing the priority pass system.
Goes to roll queue 6v6, we kind of know that's a problem already. There needs to be something there that can help alleviate that over time too.
Is there any early ideas on how to fight those queue times?
Yeah, we're going to introduce more double shield mode so people don't want to play tank.
We could talk about.
And then leave
one thing
for
we
2
hear
years.
a lot from the community is just like make tanks more fun.
Make tanks.
And maybe there's a bit of that that we can do. I actually think that there's some of that we can do. Like if you
16
look at
DPS, 10 tanks. Make tanks. Just
how
make
far do I
them.
roll this back? If you look at the graph, the queue time graph that we showed in the blog, it's a very simple bar graph. The original graph that we were going to show is more of like
horribly misleading,
sort of like line graph, kind of like showing the queue times for different roles.
So why the fuck didn't you?
Over Overwatch history, but
instead we took that out,
we kind
the
of wanted to
misleading
put
one
out
in.
the most simple one we could, just so that like everybody could look at it and understand
It was
what
a
we were talking about.
really
But one of the
misleading
things that you can see
awful
is that there was a pretty substantial change in support queue times after Overwatch 2 launched, and like the role was in a worse spot than, you know, like the supports were really getting picked on. I think that there was like a lot of complaints from the community, and we put a lot of effort into supports to where now
made a lot of bad changes. Yeah,
they're no, like for a little while they were the bottleneck, you know, like right after Overwatch 2 launched.
Yeah, you changed the format, and they were being hated on disproportionately.
Right now,
you removed all stability from the game, so you may have to make them more duelist.
Of us being able to
I know what
look
happened.
At a whole role and making it more appealing and more popular to players.
The reason why people wanted to play supports got removed.
Tanks. But I mean, I've listened to some of you talk about this, and I think we're probably all in agreement that I don't think you ever get to make like tank as popular as DPS in like a game, you know. So it's like I
really want to hear his reaction. What if we have the same amount of tanks in the game as DPS in the game? Do you think DPS would still be more popular?
Looking at in that world, and then
maybe we should start
I think
there.
some of the other things that we would talk about doing is coming up with a less restrictive like way of queuing into the game. You know, like that'd probably be where some of our initial experiments would run. And I get that that is something that could happen in 5v5 also. Like this, it is a different topic. To
yeah,
where,
just keep
yes,
it under 5 minutes. That's all you need.
Like
4 minutes and under.
You could do something like that in 5v5, but we would look at something like that in 6v6 too. And then there is a
create a game with 3 roles, tank
like,
gets the support as 0 players, which can impact
I
you
wouldn't
equally.
want this to be the answer, but like I think as a team, we have to be open to like any sort of reality that makes
no, I don't wonder why I
better.
never get invited to these.
There is a world where like people want a certain format that they're willing to put up with longer queue times to have it, and that's just the game that they won't, you know. So it's like some people might actually want that, and
they're never going to connect on this issue because they're never able to think that maybe there is problems in the game gameplay and the amount of heroes that is actually influencing this. It's just an intractable issue to them.
World is whether
we will never have. I mean,
different formats of
we'll never have as many tanks we need.
Next to each other simultaneously. I think that like
World of Warcraft doesn't have as many tanks.
There's a lot of work there. There's a lot of Warcraft, but
yeah,
if you have like players like seriously asking for things, and there's like you can see the game, let's say, growing at a faster rate, or a bunch of people jumping in and really responding to something, why wouldn't you want to shift the way you run your game? In order for
if it's successful, he will implement it. Is what he's saying, which is really important to take away.
More successful.
That's
for
really
the
good.
game to be more successful.
Yep.
You know, like
if it's successful, he'll implement it.
So I think that there's a lot of openings there, and maybe I didn't. Now that I'm thinking about my answer, I don't know if I totally answered your question there.
No, you're rambling. Reveals more.
Okay.
It's all good information.
There's a few things on the tank one in particular. We actually saw with the mid-season patch, players like we want to look at this long term though, but players are not queuing for tank more. And they're queuing for damage and tank more than they were previously.
That's not the highlight. The highlight is that they weren't queuing for tank.
With that patch, and that has sustained itself too. And it's not the percentage, you know, I think that we talk about being like the holy grail, but I think that's a recent example of something. Okay, the experience has been powered up a little bit or brought up a little bit, and here are the results of that too. So I think long term we may have to change some of our hero cadence strategy if we ever end up in a different format, right? In terms of there needs to be more options and more types of play experiences for tank players in particular, if that is the case long term.
All you have to do is not screw it. That's all I want. And that's all you need. You have a great game.
I don't want to take away any of your time. I want to rip it. Aaron, you kind of led me into it. I have to ask you this question. Have you ever considered 7v7? And if so, could it even be
well, there's a problem with 6v6 in terms of resources. So if we have one, it will get worse.
We did some really early play tests in Overwatch development of 7v7. And it's funny, like I did say earlier that, you know, like the right decisions could change over time. So like, hey, maybe that's something you revisit, right? But at the time, a lot of the feedback that we would get from those play tests,
we just
felt
talked about
like
this,
you were being attacked from everywhere at the same time. You know, there's just like enough players in the match that it happened, and I think that what can happen sometimes is when there's one too many things, like the difference between having one too many things to track and 10 too many things to track can almost feel the same to a lot of players, you know? Like, you're just
5v5 versus 6v6 in my opinion.
You know?
Everyone below Diamond is overloaded at all times if things aren't in front of them.
Design, when we're working on maps, some of the last things you do is like you might close like one window or one door, and you get that same shift in feedback from like, man, I just feel like I'm getting shot from everywhere, to like, oh,
this is your place to be empowered and inspired.
Man, is Twitch really... Is my Twitch this bad? Are they doing this on purpose?
Get more of that, you know, like I would think that we'd probably get.
Do I need to make a new new Twitch channel without
if we were to do it again? I'm also not sure if it's like the solution to the queue time issue. I think it would help it, you know, like, and I'm assuming in that 7v7 you're talking about like a 2-3-2, you know. Yeah. But man, you have way less tanks queuing than support, you know, right now. So you're still going to have like an imbalance in the ratios between roles, and so like
make the roles
I think
equally
like mathematically it probably help a little bit. But I don't think that it would be the thing that suddenly gets us back to like really fast queue times with
Venture goes into tank, May goes into tank, so Metro goes into support, Echo goes into support.
I like kind of like talk about this
even at the roles. It's not hard.
like
Why wasn't this first portal cool when you had queue time issues, even at the rolls? Like, what are we talking about?
5v5 does is it really helped with queue times, right? And we didn't talk about that
until
much, if at all,
season 8, and then it didn't help with queue times at all. But we won't talk about that.
Overwatch 2, and we did this, and
so it didn't help with support queue times at the start. It didn't help with tank queue times later, but it would be fine, yeah.
You know, like in Overwatch, you know, it's like it was something we really wanted to fix. Like, a lot of people aren't going to wait that long, right? It's just like it is a long time to not be playing the game. But one of the things that we were actually never really able to get at before Overwatch 2 was what the real demand was to play DPS. Because every time we did something to like shorten the queue, like whether it was like the priority pass system or any of the other things
16 heroes in the row.
Times would go down, you just 16 see going DPS. Like there was always like this like sort of like undiscovered set of demand, and so like we weren't sure
if you played tank for 3 seasons,
like, if queue time suddenly went
you
down,
have 16
if you would just
characters
get
to play
for DPS and for it to not actually affect queue times. Thankfully, that like wasn't the case.
Because people want to try out all the fucking heroes, Aaron. Because they don't get the time to try out all the heroes.
Tangent, so I'm just gonna.
They try out all the heroes. They just spend more time in the DPS category, Aaron.
On that answer, we can move on.
Well, you were talking about 2-3-2. I think that's why you were saying, because you were saying, well, we're gonna.
Oh yeah, there you go.
77, yeah.
Yeah. We're still gonna need more tank players. I mean,
yeah, you want 7v7?
What is happening to you two in chat?
I know you talked about it. I just didn't know how serious you were as you've been talking about it.
I mean, it's not. The big thing was like the 2 tanks, right? Like people want 2 tanks. They want to have the synergy. They miss the synergy, or they just want it to. So it's like you can't blame one role, right? They can't just be like it's only one of you. You're the problem, right? So a lot of people want 2 tanks, especially tank players. I think personally, from the people I've seen who say they want 6v6 are typically tank players. That is the majority of people that I believe who want 6v6.
And high ranked DPS players, and everyone else does not know enough to give proper feedback. That's the trouble. Very hard to get proper feedback. So like, they all feedback by feelings.
Idea was like,
and feelings don't settle for a month after you do something.
People believe that the game would be too open, like it would feel empty, wouldn't feel like as full as
it did
before.
It was.
It didn't. It actually felt okay. My thought process is if I felt that way before, because the game's also evolved, right? Like the game's changed a lot over the years, and if the game didn't feel empty for 5v5, would it feel too chaotic with 7v7? Gives them the synergy. It cuts down on the queue times. It lets everyone still be able to play their game at extra DPS, allows people to queue more, but also people enjoy the role. That's a good thing. People want to play those characters. I think that's a really great thing to have.
Support load would be high. It'd be very difficult to balance.
Because of
he's really pushing 7v7.
Probably can't.
They have performance issues, Flats. I know. We literally talked about this, sir. Come on, get with the picture.
Like, we'd have to do work, you know, for 6v6, 7v7 would probably be harder, you know. I can't promise that it would be harder. Like I haven't like actually talked to our engineers about it. Sometimes things that you think ought to be easy are hard, and sometimes things that you think ought to be hard are kind of like easy.
It's a direct correlation. The load on servers, surely.
I guess I don't have like a great answer for you there. It is interesting though when you talk about like, you know, like, hey, maybe that would bring queue times down. I don't think it would bring them down as much, but like there are
shut down, Jesus.
Versions of
First off, it's not doable. Second off, it's a fucking stupid idea because it wouldn't even solve the queue times.
What if queue times were only like 20% worse, you know? And what if some of the social problems were only 10 or 20%?
Imagine wasting your precious time with the devs.
Up with this other format where it's like, oh, hey, we've
That's not what we're talking about,
Flats. A lot of the problems. and like kept a little bit of the old ones, but not as much as we used to have, like in the world of OpenQ, or the world, even worse, the world of like No Limits or something like that. There's maybe like some versions of the game in there that actually work for everybody, you know,
but they don't know what it
like,
is, and they're having internal conversations about it.
What those would be, but like, I'm open
Nothing
to
interesting or new worked out here. There's been a couple of things.
I'd like to come in
Not
at
much
this
though.
point, because I think that this is something you've kind of alluded
I mean, what do we expect?
You've alluded to around it, I feel, a few times.
But we've never seen Alec and Aaron in the same room at the same time, so we confirm they're not. They're not just like somebody wrapped in bandages and painted
kind of
differently.
Shown like a propensity, just the way you're talking. I feel like you guys have already explored a lot of this, which is just what I want to talk about is the hybrid OpenQ. You mentioned it in the blog where you're like, we're actually looking at a hybrid OpenQ system. I think for all the people who are
don't give them out.
Enjoyers,
no, don't give them an out.
A section of people who are
just make the game better. Otherwise, you have to balance one tank and two tank between each other. It's awful to have to do that.
That's really difficult because it's not really a seriously balanced mode. It's not really given much attention. But there
is internal conversations code for we sometimes mention it at lunch or at the water cooler to laugh about. Yeah, they probably have like a, you know how these businesses go. They probably have like a weekly meeting where there's like any other business in that meeting, right? And in that any other business section, somebody probably goes, do you want to talk about 66 for a bit and see how that feels? Or do you want to talk about OpenQ, no rollout?
A little bit. I think one of the things we're looking at with our experiments,
the internal conversation is a bit more concrete, probably.
Implement long term, right? We need to be able to make games swiftly, make sure those games are quality. We need to make sure that long term we think they're healthy and can be balanced too. I think we're gonna try some, you know, max 2 variants for sure. I think there's an element there of, you know, even in the 5v5 format, are there hybrids? I think there's like the first question everyone has is like 5, 5, 6, 3, 6. I think like our Java designers just like, actually there's like C, D, E, F, G, like we can keep going, right? Bunch of different options we can always look at and try to learn from. So I think I actually saw your video many months ago about that max 2. So I think we're gonna like experiment with some sort of format there.
Smiled. He's seen it.
I think there's some questions of, do we want to try
another
format where, you know, that solo player actually gets a bonus of some sort? You know, if you are that, you know, say you're the solo tank and you're playing 1-2-2 again, but it's actually OpenQ format, you're playing against 2 tanks, it's gonna be rather difficult. Do we need to give you something? Or you're the solo support.
Yeah, you'd have to do both styles. You'd have to do the buffs for tanks, and then you'd have 2 groups of 2 tanks that are specifically designed to hit on the singular 1 tank. You'd have the Reinhardt destroring comp. You'd have fucking Malga Diva that just stops the Reinhardt doing anything with the damage. It's on. You just recreate the same issues.
Are certain people locked into the roles of the game? Like maybe 3 of them are. So you always have to have a tank to support a DPS at least. Right, you have that.
If you have one tank, and then the other player doesn't play tank, it becomes a tragedy of the common situation every single time. People stop queuing tank. Simple. It's always going to happen. It doesn't work.
Some of these experiments might be flawed, right? But we want to get them in front of players just to see how they react.
I don't think you need to. If you're actually good at designing, you think these things through. You don't need to get in front of players to know how it will work.
That's more of a 5v5 test.
If you're creating a game theory type situation, you fucked up, okay? Right?
6v6.
Can we just not think through the game theory situations?
Even in the world of 5v5, tests like that I think could be very interesting. You know, like we've talked about like what it was like, you know, before roll queue was.
Hey guys, can we all think of a number between 1 and 100? Okay, you win if you are 10 higher than the average. Go chat.
Typically,
I'm gonna choose 20.
Like most of the time, not every time.
You win if you're 10 higher than the average. Like, one go. Put a number between 1 and 100.
And they're trying to make answers, and so like, I don't think
closest wins.
OpenQ is like the right answer for the main part of the game, right? Yes, we do have a community there. It's actually our third, like, permanently the third most popular game mode after ranked and quick play. You know, like. It's I think it's like close to like 10% of like player hours are just
anyone else?
Like OpenQ, right? There's still a decent amount of people playing that mode. That being said, I don't think we want it to be the main mode, but that flexibility of being like, hey, can our DPS just swap the tank even if it's just for a little bit?
Happened?
You know, like we just want to do a particular thing without going all the way into that world of like,
sick wins.
Let's just have, you know,
you can't solve it. It's a game theory situation.
I think that there could be something there that would be fun. The 6v6 side of it.
I lost by picking 20 was the answer.
Complicated.
That's
and
the
also
point.
Like
I roll tank. The other person doesn't roll tank. I lose.
Like
so I don't pick tank.
To play a particular role.
I chose low on purpose just to show.
This. Like it's funny the way that
everyone goes to 99 immediately is how it actually works out, and everyone loses.
It all means is it's OpenQ. Everyone goes into one of our play tests, And once you get 2 people to select DPS is just locked out, right? And so like there's versions of this that we could implement.
Person with the
that
best
could be like
STD
that,
wins.
But suddenly it still means like if you were
best
to do this and put this
SSD
into
gets
comp,
the DPS role.
your tank player might not actually.
Person on the Switch never gets to lock
on
ever.
your team as you get into
it's
that.
all orbs floating around.
It does get into some what we were talking about earlier,
that's what I
which
said.
is like, yeah, but is that good enough? You know, there's a drawback there where you're gonna feel like you're at a disadvantage. But is it worth it in order to have a system where you don't have really long?
It doesn't work, and we're wasting our fucking time.
And you're still able to have a different format of the game. Maybe it's not, right? But I think it's probably worth talking about more. It's another reason why we said this is like this.
That's why I need to be on that podcast so I can explain it to these people.
It's like
that you can't
we'd
create
like to start talking about
a tragedy of the common situation and expect the commoners, the random masses, to do the things that are
some of
good
this
for
with the
the
community.
game.
You know, it's like whether it's
they will do the obvious thing, which is not pick the tank role because you will be stuck as a singular tank.
You know, in 5v5, or whether there's some sort of other role limit that we end up doing for a 6v6 playtest. It'd
Max
be
2
nice to
tanks.
start working through some of that. I think we have a few that we want to run, and we'll probably be doing it in season 13. But other than that, yeah, like
there's a reason why we did roll lock and not max of this amount of players. It's very simple. We didn't do 2v2 no roll lock. We did roll lock
took
for a
way
reason.
too much time. You got the rest of this, all you.
Thank you. No, I don't even know if I'm allowed to ask this actually, but
that was a waste of
if you
20
want to
minutes.
decline, if you want to decline, feel free to say no. But
how big is your ass?
I love to hear that you're experimenting. I think 10% actually sounds like a really surprisingly high number. You're telling me the 10% of player hours are in open queue. I'm like, wow, I would have never guessed that. And that
might be more like 9, and it always kind of goes up and down. But yeah, it's
still
pretty
like,
high
for me. I'm like, wow, because that's a mode that nobody really pays attention to. But do you? It's great to hear that you're experimenting. But do you there's been a lot of Overwatch, I'll say clones, we might say generously competitors that have been kind of coming around recently. Do you look at them and kind of get lessons from them, like relearn some lessons? Because they're kind of, a lot of them, one that rhymes with Arvel Kivels, that is kind of going through a lot of the same decisions that earlier Watch went through. Does having them experiment for you in some way, does that kind of
I don't think Aaron has enough time in his week to be honest.
It could. We're always looking at other games. You like?
Yeah,
how
that
I
means
just
no,
this
but
into like a generic answer.
No, but I will learn something
that's
if
totally fine.
I see it, but I'm not going to say it
necessarily
because I'm not going to go into it.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about a specific game, but yeah, well.
Why would he not talk about the
the
specific competitor against him? But of course, he could talk about Marvel Rifles. That doesn't mean
it'll
anything.
be interesting to see how
look.
some of these other games, whether they change over time. Also,
Sure.
I think there is like a pretty decent part of the gaming community, especially when you talk about the free-to-play community, that kind of jumps from game to game.
Yeah, there's no other direct
so the
competitor
ones that
British.
don't,
I don't know why they're couching it. You're allowed to talk about
like
different
your
games
core
as your
audience,
competitor.
And your core audience will start, like they're going to have opinions on the way the game ought to go, and they're going to play it a certain way. And it's like in a competitive game, they could start finding issues in the game. And like every dev team, worth their salt is going to have to examine the issues that come up in that game and see what they do to solve them. So it will be nice to be able to watch other game teams like work through issues.
I'd love to see them speculate on the things that actually infected queue times.
Did that answer it?
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, look, it just came to my mind, so I apologize for kind of like.
But they'll never
push
in that direction.
You guys can talk on.
Nobody on the podcast has ever talked about properly about queue times
I don't
in an intelligent way.
I don't obviously want to go into an interview where you just like dodge for an hour straight, like that. No one's going to want to watch that, but like shouldn't feel like you're walking on eggshells.
Well, yeah, I don't want to put you in an awkward position either. So, because I appreciate you giving us your time and talking.
He's such a nice guy. How are you such a nice guy?
I think even then, it kind of like, competition's good. It's healthy, and it starts to crystallize.
Hey guys, we're friends here. We like each other, right? We like you. Yeah, we like each other.
I think Overwatch is
Ref, what you did now,
a lot
man?
of reasons,
Fuck off.
and I think a lot of that is like the love and care we put into our heroes, and hopefully like that's clear to people too.
I see the love and care.
I think that competition's great.
I just need you to be like 5 points better.
More, and makes it clear to players and yourselves like what are the competitive advantages that you have over other games.
Dude, that was like a great answer.
Your advantage.
That's my answer.
Is your quality product and your consistency.
Scratch that back. We'll edit this in post.
Don't
when this
keep-
goes on YouTube, we'll just take.
Don't keep flipping it. Don't keep
I
fling
think
it.
it's a really I think
Keep the
it's a really
format
good way
consistent.
of
Keep it
putting
good. do not
I
try and
wanna go
compete with
back to
them
something
with
you mentioned earlier, which is like,
production
you know,
and
talking
content
about, like,
scheduling,
hey,
because
we're
you'll
listening to you
always
guys, like,
lose,
you
because they
kinda brought up this
can
66
shovel
thing.
trash faster than you can make
listen to you
quality.
guys. I kind of have two joint questions. One is like, well, how does the community get ideas to you? Because if I can be frank, you guys won't be able to necessarily say this, but
You
like,
get invited on the
66
SVB
conversation was very
podcast, and
loud
Alex
for very
Dawson
long.
watches it.
It was like a lot of noise for a long time, and then we get this blog. I'm pretty sure we don't necessarily want that every time. We don't want huge divisive discussions every time before something gets thought about or talked about or addressed.
Why don't you ask them why it was blacklisted, why you didn't want to talk about it?
Like, when
That would be
there's a section
interesting,
of the community
right?
who are like, we really believe in this. How does that happen?
Hey guys, just like,
and B,
you didn't talk for a
how
while,
much
and we
are
got a
you
bit
willing to
worried.
kind of let
What
the
kind
community
of
do
happened
their
there?
experimentations and maybe empower them to do their experimentations? Because, you know, with 6v6, there's like a code that people are playing in the workshop.
Yep.
I'm sure the workshop community would love more powers to be able to kind of run more tests and play. So those are my kind of joint questions. Like, how do you see the community's role in all of this?
It's pretty huge. So there's a bit of a history to this conversation, you know. And actually, like, looking at it now and looking at the response of to the blog piece, we'll see what it is to this discussion, right? I kind of wish maybe we had talked about it a little bit sooner. There is a funny story here, you know. Like, I wrote a different blog piece last December.
Okay.
It wasn't as good as this one, you know, and I'm like, hey, I think it's time for us to like talk to the community about 6v6, because it has been consistent, but there's been up and down to it, you know. Like, sometimes it's the thing that the community talks about the most. Sometimes the community is talking about other aspects of the game, you know. And so like, with this one, like, it was basically, we were gonna like throw this blog piece over the wall, and then we were all gonna go on like vacation, you know, for the holidays. And so we didn't really feel that comfortable about it. And then at the same time, at least back then, because we hadn't looked into some of the considerations of what we would need to do to really get 6v6 running.
Yes, this is live on Group podcast.
It was a little bit harder for us to talk about, right? To where, like, imagine you run 6v6 tests and everybody loves it, and then you're like, cool, we're not doing anything like that, you know, because we
have to be willing to do it,
right? And so, like, I think for us, we wanted to do enough work to where, like, before we actually talked to the community about it, we would know that it's like, hey, if we were actually going to like look into this seriously, we would need to know that we would be able
there was
to
not much
actually
said here, to be
deliver
honest,
on
so
something
far.
for our players.
This
So
is the most interesting.
Some of that delay was us kind of like doing a little bit more due diligence in order to avoid kind of like shooting ourselves in the foot here. And then I think that, like,
why didn't they just say,
it would be cool to hear from you guys. I know
we're doing some work
we're running
internally,
out of
give us a
time
bit
here,
of
but,
time,
like,
we
to
will talk
me,
about it, but we don't want to talk about it just yet.
This
Just say that,
particular
it's not
topic
hard.
is unique and it's different from a lot of the other
You can
ones
address
that
it without
have come
shutting
up. I
down the
hope that, like,
discussion.
the community thinks that we're more open and responsive in our communication to other like topics in the game than we have been to this one, you know. So it's like we have a community team that is like kind of like
you don't
really,
get to shut
like,
down
not
on
just, like, working
certain
with
topics that are
different
really
parts of the
important to the
community,
game.
but, like, really following along with those conversations. We have a lot of people on the team that also do, like, Alec, you know, like earlier was like, hey, he's like watched every one of the Group Up podcasts, you know. So it's like they
weren't ready to decide to consider it, but they could have told us they were talking about it internally, and they talk about they release something on it in the future, because they were always going to have to, right? They don't have to consider it. They could have just
and I
said
guess
no.
like I'd apologize if it feels like we're not actually doing that based off of the way that the conversation around 6v6 has gone.
Why has it gone like that?
It was hard to talk about, as you said, because of some of the noise early on, trying to get a clear read on everything. I think what helped over time was some of the more level-headed conversations, like your format and some other formats where, you know, people would
Sam versus
talk about
SCB.
their side
No,
of it,
Sam versus
and
Bilo.
they were actually trying to
100% Sam
be
versus Bilo.
reasonable, you know. And I think over time, like, I think actually like in the last 6 months, it's actually gotten better
Sam
and
versus
better.
Bilo. I told you Sam versus Bilo was important, right?
Even if it did maybe get loud in some places. So
I told you
think
how
people just
important it
coming
was.
together and trying to objectively talk about the pros and cons.
I know
of
what
both
Alex
formats.
watches.
I
Alex
think
watches
that
all of
brought a lot of
Spilo's
clarity
content.
to the conversation and what people were actually saying, what they actually wanted, rather than some of maybe the polarizing conversations that were happening early on.
He loves them.
That's great to hear. Flats, any thoughts?
Do you have the flu? No, not that I know of.
I mean, Aaron knows. Like, we had our first interview. That was one of the things I wanted to talk about, and we want to talk about it later. And I was like, I was not happy with it. I was like, okay,
yeah,
like,
I wasn't feeling great on it
and
earlier.
they are delivering on it. So
I was very tired.
It's so tough. Like I felt pretty bad
Thanks for asking.
about that
Appreciate
one
it.
too, and like maybe there was a different way to handle some of that.
As I said, I think it was coming on
felt
back.
like otherwise I was just gonna kind of like dodge it probably during the interview, and that probably wouldn't have felt that great either.
I knew you guys were taking it serious though, because it was like you told me, it was like, we're gonna talk about it, just like not right now. And I was like, all right.
So why didn't you just say that? Ask us about it. We'll say we'll talk about it, but not right now.
I know everyone wants
Communicate.
me to ask the 66 question.
One level back.
I'm
Just
not.
communicate.
I was asked not to, but they said they'll talk about it later. And here we are later.
Why don't you just say that? Jesus Christ, it's not how. Yeah, he's really frank. He's trying to communicate really clearly. It's just weird that he didn't.
In the long run, with your core community,
Really weird.
People that actually follow all the stuff. A little bit difficult on the greater gaming.
It's weird that we had to get here.
Used to play Overwatch. Those people maybe don't play anymore. Obviously, that's
Yeah, no, it is very close to apologizing. I agree.
To tie it all back to the beginning of this this podcast, I think those little things really do re-strengthen that trust. So thank you.
Yeah, totally. And I know we're going over, but then here's a question for you. Like that was a pretty lengthy blog piece with a lot of detail in it, and we've typically tried to keep them shorter than that. Do you guys have like a preference here?
Longer.
You know,
more.
What?
More. Longer. Honestly, I mentioned earlier that you only put one graph in because like you didn't want to like overload.
Yeah.
I would like more because personally
these dev blogs are always communicated through this guy to the casual player base. They're not watching it anyway.
It was more
so
fun.
Give everything into him.
Season 9,
put it to a level that he can understand it, and then hopefully he can dumb it down.
Right. So like,
the scary part is when he misunderstands because he misunderstood there.
Us having that data to dig into is really important because
they said earlier they were thinking about putting a different, more complicated graph in and deciding against it random.
And I think they think that when you say there's millions of people that play every day, they're probably looking at this and going, I call bullshit. There's no way, because they don't have the Steam charts, because the Steam charts is not what most people play on. And if you look at the Steam charts, it's quite low in comparison to, say,
I'd say 120k, right?
So we have Battle.net, you have console.
120k? It's about 50k on Steam, so 120k is about reasonable.
All that type of information will always, I feel like, do better or reflect better for you.
Steam definitely the majority at the moment, so I think between everything, 120 is as much you could hope for.
Yeah, that's really... Oh, go ahead, Alec.
I was going to say, I think that information just has helped everyone have better conversations about the topic, too. I think a lot of it early on, why it can get maybe so much fervor around is like people don't have the information.
There's enough data, yeah.
Kind of, they just have ideas.
So give us
the information.
Yeah, so game dying is really easy narrative to spin, isn't it? I get the frustration, but they can just provide the data.
We'll just keep doing that.
If they wanted to provide the data, they would.
Some of the topics even deeper. Maybe not as deep as this one, Aaron. I don't know if we need to. I don't know if there's anything that needs a 9-page essay on in the game, but maybe like 5, right? So maybe something.
That's pretty amazing. You know, like as far as giving players more information, like one thing we do talk about internally sometimes is like how we could potentially give people like a little bit more access to some
I don't think it's possible
data.
to have an educated guess. I think 120k is probably about
really like
where it is.
Like Blizzard to give out like player scores and stuff like that. But like as far as like balance and stuff like that, I think that there's like for the type of game we are and the type of audience we have, something like that I think would be really useful to that community. It is a decent amount of work though, and so it's like if we were to ever do something like that in order to like get something like that going, there's a lot of planning we'd have to put around it in order to make sure it's not taking away from some of our other initiatives, you know. And it is like I recognize it'd be incredibly useful to the two of you. You know, you would love to have it. As you start getting like into other parts of the community, it might not be the most useful thing for everybody to have access to, but like
Flats
you
is
have
a
dedicated hardcore community now, and like what they're looking for
Flats
is
the casual community.
I think our community
Flats
was
is everything.
for 2 months after like the first game launched.
Flats is 300,000 views every video that he does one of these.
I'm being told that Aaron, you're late for a meeting apparently, but Jared is saying you're late for a meeting. So I'll be really succinct and say, as someone who runs a 4-hour blog regularly, more is better. I real talk, I don't know if casual players really read the blog, so it's like only us hardcore people who read the blog. So
no, it's not. They watch you read it, you idiots. Jesus Christ. Flats is the guy.
Like, when we have this data, we can talk reasonably and rationally. When we don't, we're just throwing darts at the board.
And you have to be careful what you present, because Flats needs to understand it and be able to communicate it to
the
the player base.
The moment you're able to make your 8-hour podcasts, that's when we're like, that's the success case.
Exactly.
Hey, to be fair, there's a lot of people, myself included, who read those to people, and lots of people watch those be read. So like, it goes much further, I think.
Yeah, I watched you read yours.
Yeah, I hope you liked it.
Yeah, that's
Watch
It's a
Flats
little
read it.
awkward watching somebody read what I wrote. You know.
I can imagine.
Internal cringe, yeah.
Flats used to react content, so he reacts to other people's videos and then probably reacts to people watching his videos. So it's all part of the content game. Flats, is there anything else you want to say
SVB,
before
stop
we
talking.
sign off?
Well,
I think we do have to
weird.
let these guys get going.
Yeah, Flats, he does
Just
the react
thanks for doing
content.
it.
What?
Much appreciated. Look forward to everything you have coming, and really hope that we
Really,
have
you
some
really
exciting
like
stuff to
Flats.
look forward to in the future. And I know that you guys will do whatever you can to make the game as good as it possibly can be.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You're both great.
Thanks for having us. Seriously,
I'm not
glad. Glad you could push back.
Love you
felt
too.
like you could push back in the conversation.
Yeah,
That felt-
I'm glad I'm
back
here
and
too,
forth,
guys.
man. Really
Thank you very
appreciate
much for being so nice. Flats, you're a lovely
I super
person.
concur with Flats said, and I'll
SVB,
just add
you
that I
waffle a
think
little
that,
bit, and I
like,
love you.
Obviously, this is
You'll never
taken
invite me
with
on
a
the
pinch of salt,
podcast because
chilled by SVB,
I say
because
the
he's
F
on the
word.
call, but you guys are orders
Aaron,
of magnitude more communicative than we ever had. Devs
fail
and,
to communicate in the future. It's really that simple. Just don't blacklist a topic for no reason. Just say we don't want to talk about it just yet.
More communicative with us, and I think it really,
keep going on, keep
helps us.
keep
It
watching
makes me feel
Spylo's
better,
content.
I'm
He
sure Flats feels better.
occasionally
When
mentions
we know
me.
what you're doing, what you're thinking, where you're coming from, it makes